Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hello, fellow leaders. Christine Courtney here. And today in the studio, we have, back by popular demand, Tom Armstrong. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, everybody. Hey, thanks, Christine.
As a gentle reminder, if you have not listened to Tom before, he is full of wisdom around the topic that we're tackling today, which we're tackling head on difficult conversations and make them a little less difficult. And if you want to know more about this, you want to get a lot of the background on a lot of this, listen to episodes 5 and 6 on navigating feedback and difficult conversations, because that's also with Tom. And we talk about, in general, giving feedback and giving ongoing feedback so that hopefully you have to have less difficult conversations because you're having more frequent ones that before it gets to a point of difficulty. Or if you have to have difficult conversations, you've established a relationship and a way of talking with each other on things that are less high stakes. But today I'm going to really challenge him. I have a list, Tom. I came with a list. I came with a list that he has not seen of some scenarios that I've gotten from some of our listeners and some other folks in the field of their most difficult conversations that they've had to have or should have had or, still need to have. And so we're going to really dive into the difficult ones. If you listen to this and go, oh my gosh, my levels are much lower than this, I just need to have feedback, go back to episodes 5 and 6 to get that. Today, we're going hardcore here on some difficulty. So you ready, Tom?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm excited. So first of all, any notes in general on having a difficult conversation before we jump into scenarios? Any overall general tips on difficult conversations before scenarios?
Well, as you said, yeah, it's actually a really fun topic. I don't know.
Fun for you.
Fun for me.
Mostly it's not fun.
It's fun because it's hard, I guess. Just yesterday, I was giving someone some thoughts as they were feeling pretty upset about something that their direct report was doing. It was the behavior, but it was also what the perceived motivation was behind the behavior, I think. So first of all, I really just listened. I tried not to offer advice, but I knew that I had to give this advice because I think in that moment, she just wanted someone to she needed to be able to dump. And I'm like, dump on me. It's ideal is that you're, have so much, shed your frustration with your boss, not your colleagues, not your direct reports, but get the emotions out here. Right. So that was really good. And I told the person, I'm like, I'm really happy that you're sharing this with me. It makes me feel like that you trust me and stuff, with this, that you're able to just go ugh, when you need to. But my guidance to her was, I know you want to get this off your chest with the person. Do not wait until you're at equilibrium so that you won't regret anything that you say, because so much of what we are going to say we believe to be true, and we might later after reconsidering go maybe that wasn't right. And then the other thing is, I didn't go through the wheel or anything like that with her. I was just first, just to make sure that that you even time it right, is don't bring up anything that has to do with an assumption about their motivations, because you're probably wrong. We can't really guess that accurately. And even if you're right, it doesn't help with what you want to do is have the behavior change. And if you're talking about motivations, you're giving someone a real opportunity to just focus on the fact that you got that wrong.
Right.
And now you're not even talking about the behavior. So it works to your disadvantage to talk about motivations rather than behaviors. So those were a couple of things that are fresh for me that I end up saying a lot to folks before they have any kind of a difficult conversation is make sure you're in a real calm state, that you've done your pre-work, like we've talked about in the previous podcast. And then in this case too, it was really manage your assumptions and only talk about what you know to be true.
Yeah, it's a good point. You brought up a word. I just want to make sure that new listeners understand what you mentioned. You said the wheel. When Tom was talking about the wheel, he meant the difficult conversation.
not the torture device from the...
No, let's be clear. We're not there.
1600s or whatever.
It's a difficult conversations wheel that we have available for free on our website. If you're interested, at tlpnyc.com, and you can get that difficult conversations wheel, and it takes you through the process of preparation for the difficult conversation so that it is not so much a torture exercise, right? That's the whole point, is that you're going through this. So anyway, he will have that available. But if we're talking about the wheel, that's what we're talking about. I love what you said about equilibrium, getting to equilibrium. And the second thing was, because sometimes people think, you also said calm, but sometimes we think we have to be so calm, but maybe you just have to be at like an equilibrium state, which I thought was interesting that you mentioned. And second was prepare, check your assumptions. And that's part of that difficult conversations wheel. People often don't prepare for these conversations, and we feel good. We have a little feeling of like righteousness when we're angry or when our emotions are heightened. And so we want to speak. We want to get that off of our chest a lot of times. And so we go into a conversation with that wrong devil on our shoulder saying, no, I need to tell them how I feel. And that is not a state of equilibrium. And that's where I think you're mentioning we got to check ourselves, because all of these conversations that we're mentioning today are going to be made 1,000 times worse by that kind of emotion. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, that emotion is powerful, because if you feel it, that is motivating you to have this conversation, but it should not motivate you to have the conversation in the moment. Right?
Yeah.
Write down your feelings, journal about it, walk around, talk to a partner that you trust, whatever it is, but just practice the conversation, but do not have it in that moment. It's almost like the corporate version of a drunk dial, right? You don't want to have that conversation then. So prepare for the difficult conversations wheel.
You are a little bit insane or drunk or whatever,
a little nuts
from the chemicals that are in the system. Yeah.
That's right. Lots of chemicals, natural or not. You want to be chemical free going into these conversations. All right. So I think those are 3 good things. Check your assumptions and don't mention them. Don't guess their assumptions in the meeting. Prepare and get to a state of equilibrium. If you can start with those 3 things as the basis for going into these difficult conversations, I think it's good.
Can I give you a 4th one?
Yeah, please.
One of the main things I do is, before I have one, I'll definitely talk to someone and say, I have, with my boss, usually I go to Yindi and I'll say, I have this difficult conversation. Can I talk it through with you? And can you pretend to be the other person sometime and then get feedback? Can I practice a little bit or something?
Yeah, it's a role play.
And then she usually finds some stuff where I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I talked to her first, because I was about to say that thing and it was clearly gonna, trip me up. So yeah, practicing and talking it through with somebody ahead of time can be helpful for sure.
Very. And if you don't have a boss where you can do that with, or if the difficult conversation is with your boss, then choose a friend you trust or a partner in your life, not in the office, preferably not sharing these things, personal information with other people that are in your office, unless it's someone that, like your boss or someone that you highly trust. Okay, that's great. So once you've done all of that preparation, which that's like a higher level preparation, is that kind of role play, but it makes a big difference. Once you do that, the other thing that helps you do, by the way, that role play, is it helps you get to the point faster. And it makes these conversations take less time, which is less torture for people. So as difficult as this conversation is for you to have, it's more difficult for them to hear, because they're not ready for it most of the time. And so if that's the case, then you want to shorten that amount of difficulty for them by having that conversation take less time from your end. Maybe it needs to take more time for them processing, but it shouldn't take that you're beating around the bush. And if you practice it with someone else, one of the good things about that is that the second time you say it, we generally tend to get more to the point. Okay. So any other tips for difficult conversations in general before we go on?
I think those are kind of broad strokes. If you look at the wheel, you'll find more detailed. There's 10 points on it, which I don't think we need to go through all 10 right now, but they or unless you want to, but they do kind of like go into the deeper elements of those categories, I would say, in terms of doing your pre-work.
Yeah. And they're really good questions. Sometimes people look at it's like I did the first time. I was like, oh my God, this is exhausting. I don't want to go through this whole step process, right?
10.
I think it's like 10 things. It can feel like a lot, but that's the whole point. It's like, if you go through this, that's part of going through it. Like, you can't go around it. You can't go under it. You can't go over it. You got to go through it. And one of those is doing your homework in the preparation. And that takes away a lot of the sting, because once you've thought about this to that degree, you're ready to have this conversation. You're actually happy a little bit to be having it and to having done it. Most people really, when we ask them beforehand, do they want to have this conversation? No. And we avoid it forever. But then after we've had it, almost, I would say 99% of the time, people are glad they had the conversation, because at the end of the day, it's an opportunity to deepen your relationship. And one of the things we're trying to do all the time, whether it's at work in our personal lives, and these difficult conversations can also be happening, and most likely are happening in your personal life, it's an opportunity to either cut things off or deepen that connection and deepen that relationship. And if you firmly believe that, there's hope there, right? There's opportunity. So, all right, you ready, Tom?
Bring it.
What's maybe the most difficult conversation that you've ever had to have at work, or what's one of them?
Yeah, they're uncomfortable. Okay, so an example of a really hard one, and I still don't have the exact like advice for it, is especially if it's like centered around hygiene. It's very uncomfortable to hear, I would assume, and very uncomfortable to express. Takes a very, very sensitive, approach, and definitely pre-work. Like in that case, I would go to HR first and kind of say, this is a conversation that I'd like to have. Is it appropriate? Can I have that conversation? And then kind of talking with them about some ideas for how to approach it. You want to be in compliance. You don't want to do something that could put you at risk by saying the wrong thing. And so some of those difficult conversations that teeter on the boundaries, because some of them are clear, like, oh, that's totally just a difficult conversation to have. But this one in particular is so nuanced. And I think it's important to think about who's having that conversation with that person. It could be inappropriate for me to have it, but more appropriate for someone else to be the person to lead that conversation, depending on the scenario. So that one to me feels very nuanced. And and it's very rare.
You jumped into the deep end right away.
So you asked me you said what's hygiene, the deep end?
I have hygiene questions on my list, but I was going to warm you up to those. All right.
You said what's the deep end?
What's the hardest? So let me give some examples for people who are like, what do you mean hygiene? So I'm going to give you some examples of ones that are absolutely true that either I've had to have with somebody or people that I've spoken to in getting this list prepared today had to have. And then Tom, you can tell me, I've had ones where people have smelled like booze and they were not drunk. I could tell that they were not drunk, but it was booze from the night before, right? Mm-hmm. So that was one difficult part when it comes to that.
It's coming out of the pores kind of thing. Like,
it's still coming out of you, right? You're still in that stage. I had to have somebody that I spoke to. I have not had to have this conversation, but somebody did who was in HR, that the person had very, very strong body odor, mm-hmm. and that they were getting lots of complaints. Nobody wanted to work with them. No one wanted to sit in the cubicles next to them. I had another person, imagine this, who when I was asking questions for this episode of the podcast said that the person, she had someone who smelled like urine. So so this was a long-term employee who was going through some hard times, but probably was older, needed some adult diapers, needed some help. So that was one that she got a lot of complaints about.
Oof, that's hard.
Sometimes it's related to, in the same kind of vein, like the food you heat up in the office is smelly, and it's, you're taking your fish and you're putting it in the microwave, and the whole office smells like fish for the next hour or so. And
okay, we're back in the shallow end of the pool here. That one's a little easier to deal with.
That one's easier, but certainly the other ones,
the booze one is a little easier.
Yeah,
the one that has to do with something that's like the further away outside of the person's control is the conversation might not be with that person, but with the person that's. So if someone's coming in and due to a medical condition, they're not creating the issue in the office, but there is an issue in the office related to people complaining about the smell and the odor of somebody, and that it's related to a medical condition that person can't control in the office, then the difficult who is the recipient of the difficult conversation?
Well, I'll tell you in this case,
an environmental factor. I mean, that's a really hard one.
Well, in this case, she did exactly what you said. In some of these cases, they're a little tricky. Your best bet is to go to HR because these people are trained in this stuff all the time. And if they haven't, this is a great opportunity for them to learn, right? So I used to be in HR years ago, and trust me, we would get stuff like this every so often. I worked for a big corporate firm. And so basically this is how the person handled it. So that they were smelling like urine. They were getting complaints. HR was getting complaints. So she had to have this conversation. So she sat her down. This is a long-term employee, very good, right? They don't want to lose her, but everybody's, they're getting multiple complaints. And so she had to sit her down and say, hey, listen, I've been getting some complaints. This is a sensitive topic, but that you have a smell around you sometimes of urine. And I just want to say that I understand that there could be a medical condition that you have, or you may need some help. You may need some resources. And so we're going to do two things. If you're up for it. One is we're going to provide supplies for this, like we would in the women's restroom on, sanitary napkins and so forth. We're going to provide some supplies for you for this because we understand these types of things are expensive, right? And I'm talking right now about like adult diapers. And we're also going to supply you with a referral for a medical professional that can help with this thing. Now, it was very uncomfortable for her to have this conversation. I will tell you that it was very uncomfortable for the person to hear, but ultimately she cried, right? We have to be ready for tears in some of these conversations. Yep. But she was very thankful for her. Mm-hmm. And yep. She was obviously embarrassed, but she was thankful. And she took her up on both things. And at the end of the day, she came back to her later and said, after she had a doctor and she had these methods for doing it, because she lived alone, she didn't have this feedback coming to her any other part of her life. She was very grateful. And so it deepened that trust and that relationship. But that's hard, that's a hard one.
I think a key thing that you're describing in there is also goes into, like where's this realm between feedback and the difficult conversation? Because difficult conversation can mean so many things. In this case, it's leaning kind of towards feedback. You're trying to actually, this is about changing something in the environment of the office, at least related to that person. And it was a very collaborative conversation. It was like, here's the situation, and I want to like collaborate with you on figuring out how do we resolve, what's possible, because we want to be as supportive as possible.
Yeah, but it wasn't really collaborative in the sense that she had two things ready to go. And what's the woman going to say? No, you just has to feel like it's somewhat, you have to have something ready. Sure. You can't be like, what are we going to do about this? Let's brainstorm. I mean, that would be torture. The booze one is a little bit easier.
Booze one's a lot easier.
When you see that, you could say, you smelling like booze. Either you had a really fun night last night, or are you drunk now? Mm-hmm. And as soon as they say they're not drunk now, let's hope that's the answer. Then you say, okay, let me tell you why this is unprofessional in terms of how this comes across, because it seems like people are questioning now whether you're drinking on the job. Yeah. And so you may not realize it, but you have to figure out how your body metabolizes alcohol. And I'm not going to tell you what to do in your personal life, but when you come into the office, you've got to have a way that you're not smelling like you could be under the influence.
Yeah. And I think with the booze, the BO, the food is smelly, those ones are also ones where I would tend to lead with a we comment, really just about like, organizationally, we can't, we just can't have people can't come to the office smelling like alcohol. These are the reasons. I do smell alcohol on you right now. And then, are you currently intoxicated? Like you just said, but I would also start and lead with that, like the we thing, so that it doesn't feel so much about like I'm isolating them, but it's like, this is the reason why. I mean, it's a comprehensive thing.
Yeah. The other way, Tom, that conversation can go, and I've had this also, is that you ask the person like, hey, you smell like alcohol. Have you been drinking? And a lot of times, if the person has been, then you have to get them out of that situation that they're in pretty quickly, move them to a private space, and then bring in someone hopefully from HR if you have somebody, but they'll be ready with like, here, listen, it's unprofessional to come to work this way. You can't perform your job at the quality that we need it. It puts all the rest of us in an uncomfortable situation. And we understand that this might be a disease for you. And here's some ways that we're going to need you to get help. And here's the ways we can offer it. Yeah. Right. And your HR department will know all of those. They have lots of referrals that they can give. And sometimes you can mandate it. And that completely depends on your organization. But both of those situations have come up at varying levels. And to your point earlier, Tom, with these types of things, you always want to get HR involved because they're going to protect you. They're also, HR is involved with legal. And so you don't have to go to a lawyer yourself. You don't have to go to the legal department. HR will do that for you. If you don't have an HR department or you're the HR department, some of these situations, you definitely want to get your general counsel. You want to get your consultant lawyer on board. Sometimes I'll call people on those situations if I have them.
Frequently when I'm giving also difficult like feedback or having a difficult conversation like this, also I'll lead with, the reason I'm speaking to you about this because we really believe in you. Like there's these comments that are true, like it has to be genuine, but there's these comments that I remind myself to also say out loud so that the other person it kind of softens things a little bit. Like it's not a compliment sandwich, but I am leading with something that's like, we really believe in you. We love your work. We want to be able to resolve this and we have resources for you as well.
Tom is not a fan of the compliment sandwich.
I know,
If you
keeps
guys
coming up.
out there are keeping track, Tom, do you want to, since you dropped that whimsical statement, do you want to just give people an example of a compliment sandwich?
You're doing a great job. Your salmon is stinking up the kitchen, but I love your work. So it's what's ideal to avoid the compliment sandwich. Some people like to get compliment sandwiches. I don't know that this is the case, but it's often a symptom of that they're just not getting enough affirming feedback generally. So if they're getting that, if they are hearing not just sincere and specific praise, but the, hey, I see you doing this thing. When you do that, it's great for these reasons or whatever. Then you don't have to deliver the hard stuff for the more challenging corrective stuff by sandwiching it between compliments, because they're already getting that. They already feel seen. So now they're also getting the corrective feedback, and they don't say, well, you only point out the things that I do wrong. You never say the things that are right. People like compliment sandwich when they're not generally getting the affirming stuff enough. So it's like you have to have, that's more pre-work. That's part of the discipline and practice of managing, is remembering to tell your reports the affirming stuff.
Yeah, boy, am I very thankful to the old Christine when I have to go into a difficult conversation, and I've had some really positive conversations with this employee in the past. I'm like, thank you, self, because I put an investment in to build trust in order for this conversation today to take place. All right, so we've gotten the hygiene questions out right away. So let's go into
Relax.
Some other ones here. So one of the ones that comes up probably most often in the group, we work with a lot of different companies and a lot of different, cohorts of management teams and so forth. And one of the ones that comes up a lot, especially with new, younger folks entering the workplace, is how do I ask for a raise? How do I have that? To many people, that feels like a difficult conversation. So when we talk about asking for a raise, what would be an example of how you would coach people on that difficult conversation?
The difficult conversation being, I want to ask for a raise.
Yeah.
So front of mind are the things that you don't do, because I'm surprised how often they happen. Like the worst example that I had was someone said, so what's with raises this year? It's kind of like in a room, just spontaneous. So what's up with raises this year? I'm like, oh, just Google. Okay, so that's one thing. You can use your search engine and type in how to ask for a raise and do a little research is tip number one. Because I am surprised quite often by the way people ask. I do think it's important to have some decorum, and a level of professionalism in the way that you ask and prepare for the way that you ask. This is something where the difficult conversation wheel doesn't really help you, but it is good to do some of that pre-work still. If you know generally, if you could do some research in terms of Glassdoor, something like that, where you could find out what salaries are generally for your position, it's helpful. But primarily focus on your results. So either an email in advance or going up to the person in advance and saying, hey, is there a time that we can sit down and talk about an increase in my, I'd like to talk to you about the potential for a raise. Is there a good time that I can have that conversation, so that they also know that it's happening? An email is totally appropriate for that, I think. I don't know for you, Christine, what you think, but this is personal for me. I don't mind getting the email on that. But I do like it if someone sort of asks ahead of time, and then we set up a time and we sit down and talk, and it's a little more formal.
Because you're prepared.
Yeah. And I know that I need to have a process in place for this. And I tell them ahead of time too, like there is a process to make sure that things are done fairly, obviously. So we just need to make sure that we observe the process, but definitely happy to sit down and talk. So I can see why someone would call it a difficult conversation, but it didn't even occur to me that this would be in the category.
I know, Tom, because you are in your 50s. you have to imagine yourself as a different person. A lot of people find this, and they're saying that younger and younger people find this even more difficult, to the point where they will leave a job rather than ask for what they want.
Yeah.
And so I really, I think it's really important as I'm talking Gen Z, not millennials here, but like that they're feeling like they should be given this, or they will go somewhere and go to another job, because that has been easy for them relative to you and I when we were looking for work back when you stayed in a job longer, right? So you had to work up these muscles of asking for a raise or talking about money in this kind of way that is different for this generation.
Yeah.
Or the other option is they're also a generation of much more advocates than we were. And so sometimes they'll skip you, who's their boss, and they'll go to their boss's boss's boss, and they'll write the CEO for a raise. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's the reality. So really, we're just talking about how do you have this conversation, and how do you get ready for the difficulty of hearing that you may not be ready for this raise yet. and understanding that. And so the difficult conversation then shifts to us as the boss to now have a conversation with them sensitive to the fact that they are young and don't know that they're what they don't know yet.
Yeah, I think being, as the boss, being prepared with the actual like path, like if they're not eligible for a raise at this point based on job performance or whatever the criteria is, expressing what they would need to be able to do to get there, what the path is, I think is where you create the feeling of hope. The more obscure that is, the harder. And so the times when I will talk, usually it's our part-time employees will approach me on this, and I'll look through the, basically make an assessment and then go through our process for this, because it's not just something, I can't just make a decision willy-nilly on my own. But if the answer is no, I tell them it's also a good time for feedback in that moment to say, these are the reasons why not. And let's talk again in 3 months and just see if the performance indicators have changed in that way. And then quite often they do. You'll start to see, like, if they've been showing up late, just calling out a lot, whatever the thing is, the benchmark, they haven't been achieving certain results. That can be a real motivator to have them actually achieve them, especially if they know, like, let's see what happens given this amount of time. So it's complicated because it goes both ways. Like, the difficult conversation is a lot more difficult if you don't have the results to share, quantifiable results that you can say, these are the things that I've been accomplishing on time, on budget, at quality. Like, if you can come and say that and express that, it makes it a lot harder for your boss to be able to say, like, no, versus if it's more like, I feel like I've been doing a good job, so I feel like I deserve a raise, So yeah, I would say if you're asking for an increase in your pay, it's good to show up again, show some regard for process, have some formality. It doesn't have to be extreme, but show some respect in the way that you approach it, that you take it seriously. And then, and that might just be my generation, as you're saying. But for me, I do not like it if it's sort of very sloppily approached, like just way too casual.
Sure.
And then coming in with quantifiable results that are showing why your value is that, and then asking, and if not, how can I get there? And also, making your performance even higher than what you're seeking can be good. Like, you have to be doing the work.
Yes, you have to be doing the work. You have to be great at the job you have now, star in the job you have now, and then ask for the job you want. But if you're a star player, you're more likely to get something else. And I think that transparency needs, a note for those of us who are in positions of power, to really kind of unveil what we know as what it takes to get to the next step, but they may not, and have a lot more transparency. And a lot of organizations we work with are now putting out, like, these are the different levels, and this is what you have to do to get to these next levels. And employees of all generations are finding that really, really helpful, and actually mitigating a lot of these difficult conversations, because you can point them back to the matrix that shows you, this is what you are at a junior, this is what you are at a supervisor, and at each level, if you've done these things or had this experience, it makes those conversations actually not difficult at all. It actually makes them enlightening and exciting.
Yeah.
Tatiana, you had something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to give some advice to someone who wants to do exactly that. And I think, as the employee asking for the raise, I think you do have to do some prep work, just kind of like what you were saying, and go back to the beginning of knowing kind of where it is that you want to go. And then having that conversation with your manager of, like, I want to get to this place. How do I do that? And I think being prepared for what that entails, because I think when people ask and it's kind of feels like it's coming out of nowhere, it's just kind of like, well, like you were saying, you're not really ready for this, because I think what happens is, like, it's different. It's one thing to ask for more money, but it's another thing to say, I want a promotion, right? And I think that's where the two things are. Like, if you're just asking for more money because you know that you could get more money somewhere else, the chances are people should be ready to leave if their job can't offer that, right? Like, if the starting salary is different and you're like, I'm going to leave. But if you're like, I want to get promoted, which comes with a promotional raise, which is, considerably more money, you should start at the beginning and say, what does it take to get to that position? And where am I now in this wheel or in this line? Because if the company isn't necessarily outlining that, like you mentioned, some companies are doing, but you're like, I want to get this. Or in the case of someone, it doesn't exist. The job doesn't exist. And you say to your boss's boss, this is where I want to go. This is what I envision for myself. What do you think? And then you work towards that.
Yeah. Tatiana, this actually is probably for me. I mean, again, it's subjective. Everybody's gonna be a little different. For me, I do love the conversation. Hey, this is where I want to be. Can you help me understand how to get there? And, rather than this is what I need now. This is what I would like to get to. What's the path? Because that's a great conversation to have.
Yeah, because I think when you're asking, you're like, I just need more money. You're definitely coming from a place of frustration. That is when the preparation for the conversation is helpful. But if you're just like, I know I could get more money somewhere else, and you're coming from a frustrated place, that's probably showing up in your work too. And so it's kind of like, oh, you're not doing as much, or you're quiet quitting, or whatever the case might be, in terms of a level of frustration where you're like, I want more money and I don't feel valued. That might be showing up in your work too.
Sometimes you have these like incredible employees, but there's budget constraints, and you can't cross certain budget constraints because that's just the reality of the situation too. So having that conversation is also interesting.
But have the conversation, even if you know what the budget is, because then we all know where we're feeling, and we can have an honest conversation about it. Let's change real quick because I want to get another one in. What about you're working with someone, this came up, where someone on your team is taking credit for, like, let's say the team is working on something, but one of the people is taking credit for everything.
Oh yeah, I actually did give this feedback.
You
once.
did?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is also important to like stop and do your pre-work and what are my assumptions. Some of it could be, how am I personally contributing to this potentially? You have to understand, like, you might get feedback about your style as a manager, that you're setting up a competitive environment that makes people feel they're rewarded for winning as an individual rather than as a group. Like, am I, for example, offering that trip to Hawaii for one person, the top sales, versus us as a team, and what we accomplish can have different results. So there might be elements of my own management style that are leading to that. So doing some pre-work in that way and self-analysis, that important start of like, how might I be contributing to this? But then in the sit down with the individual, if you can, again, like have specific moments, if there's an email that expresses it, or a comment that you heard that you're really talking about specifically, and going straight to the impact of what it does to the team. Like, I don't know that whether or not it's an intention to have it come across this way, this thing that you said here can come off to the team as feeling like you're taking credit for the work that everybody feels that they did. And the impact on the team is that it can feel, they don't feel as connected, and they might hesitate in terms of, their future work if they know that they're going to feel that you're taking credit. So the phrase here, and this is why it comes off that way, kind of, really describe it without saying something like, you're always taking credit for the team's work. Because that's very accusatory.
And what we want to say, but we can't. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. We hold ourselves back, and just focusing more on the like specific instances, and say like, and this is how I'd recommend you saying that, because it's really much more important. Like me in my job as a leader, it's so important that even if I do something, that the team feels like we all did it. Even when I know that I contributed most, that the team feels we did it, because that's very motivating for people. It makes them feel connected to each other, and they want to do the work in the future. If they feel that I'm taking credit, it diminishes that feeling.
Yeah. And I think also if it depends who you are to this person, if you notice that somebody on the team is taking all the credit and you're the boss, that's one kind of conversation. If you're a fellow colleague and you feel like they're taking all the credit, that's a different kind of conversation a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think if you're the boss, you can look at with them like, I noticed that you're part of this team and that you're always the one sharing, and it almost comes across as if these are all your ideas. I'm sure that's not the case, and that you wouldn't want that to be how this comes across. And the person can go, oh, no. But it's an indicator that maybe you're not appreciating them enough. So they feel like they have to use this, to your point with the compliment sandwiches, to get their needs met. I think if you're a colleague and someone's taking all the credit, especially if these are your ideas or this is happening, that is a very difficult conversation to have with the person, but yet it's important to have it. It's good to practice those things. I think what Tom said was really good when you talk about impact, whether it's impact of the team or impact on me personally. I always find that it throws people off. This is not me, but this is, comes back to as far as the art of war, that you don't go into something acting strong, right? So if you come into something and you say, it hurt my feelings when you did this, or I don't think you probably meant to do this, but I got to tell you how this feels to me. And what will happen is that people can't argue how you feel. Now, they may say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. But yeah, it did feel that way, and this is why. And you can give something specific. I think that often, and when people have given me feedback where I've done something that was hurtful to them, whether in my personal life or at work, it really impacted me. It stopped me in my tracks a little bit from my defense mechanism going up and arguing with them in my head. Sometimes, I'm smart enough now to not argue outright. Sometimes I still do, but most of the time I don't argue outright, but I'm still arguing in my head as I try to, my ego tries to defend itself. And usually the way that will disarm me is when someone shares like, an ouch moment, like, Christine, that kind of hurt my feelings a bit, or I'm just really sad about this, or, and you don't want to be too emotional about it at work, and it needs to be authentic, but sometimes it can say like, I don't feel that it's right. I feel that we all contributed to that. And the person will be like, yeah, but I was just the person as the spokesperson. And you could say, okay, well, let's talk about ways in the future that we can all be involved, or that we can, because it's important for all of us and all of our careers. And, I would hate for us to not work as well together as a team because we're handling it this way.
Yeah. And I think your manager, even though they might never hear the conversation, that the more that's happening peer to peer, the better. It's better than the person going to their boss saying, can you have this conversation with that person because it's hurting the team? They're not making, like, it's good if you yourself can have an effective conversation with your colleagues. And I do love always the thing about, if you're talking about something that they can't really argue about how you feel about the thing, which actually leads to another point that I find when people are talking to me about conversations they want to have with others. Common point that I'll make is you don't want to have too many points to make. You don't want to have too many arguments, and you don't want to have things that are subjective, because if you have one key thing that you want to change, but you mentioned 3, and one of them is arguable, if they're feeling defensive at all, they're going to go straight to this arguable one, and the whole conversation is going to be centered around that. So I just think of what are all the things that I want to say. I take away all the weakest things, or the things that are maybe subjective, and I just get rid of them. So we can focus on the key thing that's hopefully like really not something we can argue about.
Brilliant.
My feelings are one of those things. Like, that's just how I'm feeling about this. When I read that email, I felt a little bit like left out of the group.
Yeah.
Or like we were all invested in that project. And for me, it feels a little bit, I'm trying to say what the feeling is. You have to identify it yourself before you talk.
Yeah, but I think what you said is great, because you're getting it down to one salient point that's not going to take you off into a million tangents, even though you may want to throw the whole kitchen sink at them. Try to get it down to one thing is really great advice. By the way, your
salmon is super stinky. Like,
yeah. I won't bring my salmon in anymore. All right. You guys, thank you so much, Tom. We're going to do more of these because my list is long and we haven't gotten to many, but we'll have more of these.
You went straight for the hard stuff, Christine.
We went right for the hard stuff. We'll have more because we didn't even get to like when people don't have a sense of urgency, when people are yelling.
That's what I was expecting.
I know.
I gotta manage my assumptions.
Next time. We'll come back for another part. I think this is part 3 really. So listen to episodes 5 and 6, this one, and then we'll have a part 4 because this is an ongoing thing and we'll keep collecting them. If you have good questions or good situations for us, write to us, give us those questions, those difficult scenarios, and we'll come back to them another time. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Christine, and
all right. Take care, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.